Bonjour, mes amis. It's easy to respect the developers of a game who state, right at the start of the game, that they plan to accurately portray the racist elements of their period piece, noting that glossing over the bad parts of history or acting as though they didn't happen insults those who suffered through them, and those who still do. Games like BioShock Infinite and the Dragon Age series certainly portray prejudice and racism distinctly.
See? I told you there'd be more. Elves run in packs, like rodents.
But they take place in alternate histories or fantasy universes, and thus have a certain amount of creative freedom that games more grounded in reality might not have. On that note, in this video we'll be talking about Mafia III. Since our producer literally will not let me stop talking about Mafia. Not about the well-known technical problems that plagued the game at launch, but instead how the game harmonizes its core mechanics and the setting of 1960s America in order to critique the racial dynamic of the times, and how that adds to the experience of the gameplay itself. The concept of the Mafia III story is as American as it gets.
Hello, Lou.
The game places you firmly into the size 19 combat boots of African-American protagonist Lincoln Clay, a Vietnam veteran.
Regular Army at first, and then I was recruited to the 5th SFG. Special Forces.
In his spare time, Clay enjoys inserting said boots into the butts of the white supremacist Dixie Mafia, the criminal organization controlling his hometown of New Bordeaux, Louisiana. We've got all of our good story elements right away: crime, revenge, gunplay, an underdog sticking it to the man, all set to one of the best soundtracks 1968 could produce. But there's one gameplay element Mafia 3 implemented that is a lot less common in video games: racism itself. Game developer Hangar 13 took Mafia 3 in a slightly different direction from the previous two iterations of the franchise. The first two games were exclusively story-focused, based on the white Italian mob with white male protagonists, and the large, detailed worlds they took place in were used more for window dressing than anything else. For the third installment, however, Hangar 13 decided to create an open world for the game's setting, possibly inspired by the success of The Witcher 3 the year prior, and when combining that with Mafia's traditional period piece aesthetic, they had to come up with more ways to portray 1960s metropolitan Louisiana than the series had ever done before.
I need you to look at our options. Come up with a plan.
Okay, I'm gonna look at our options and come up with a plan.
And what was one of the biggest, most pertinent events of their chosen time and place? The Civil Rights Movement. Mafia 3 takes place in a fictionalized version of 1968 New Orleans, which at the time was in a period of social and civil unrest. The 1950s and 60s were a peak period of the civil rights movement's fight for the equality of Black Americans. Protests against discriminatory practices like segregation and Jim Crow laws swept the country, led by civil rights leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper.
And they were fought at every turn, often with violence, as unfortunately we still often see today. By the time we enter the story, many of the major events in the civil rights movement's timeline have already occurred, including the assassination of Dr. King earlier in the same year as Lincoln's return from Vietnam. Yet, nothing seems to have changed. New Bordeaux's predominantly black district where you start out, Delray Hollow, is the most run-down district of the city, and the attitude of the city's elite towards their African-American neighbors is more along the lines of...
Any of you coons holed up in there better come out right now! Y'all hear me? We aim to burn this shithole to the ground!
The first method Mafia 3 uses to show New Bordeaux's undercurrent of racism is its portrayal of the police.
Chief Wilson, you care to make a comment? It's those goddamn niggers. Every last one of them needs to be rounded up and shot.
Compared to other open-world crime games featuring police like Grand Theft Auto or Saints Row, Mafia's police will attack you for minor infractions instead of for only overt acts of violence. And once they pursue Lincoln, there's no possibility of getting arrested. It's escape or die. Compared to the simple checkpoint system of Mafia games past, where a death would simply load your last save or the beginning of a chapter, Mafia 3's developers decided that each death will cost you half of your hard-earned unbanked dollars, and then spawn you at a nearby area with your ammo and equipment as depleted as it was at the time of death. The statement that Hangar 13 seems to be making with these massive setbacks is replicating what far too many minorities in the US have experienced: death and loss at the hands of systemic racism for any offense, large or small, real or imagined. This is even further reinforced if law enforcement is called while the player is involved in any kind of altercation with the Dixie Mafia. The police immediately take the mob side against you and offer the added excitement of making you dodge even more bullets while you try taking a specific territory or racket. As the game warns, this isn't just a glitch.
The cops see you fighting Sal's goons. They're coming after you, every time.
As the cops rush to the aid of the larger, less diverse criminal organization, we are exposed to, at best, an undercurrent of bribes and corruption in the New Bordeaux Police Department, or, at worst, rampant systemic racism.
Looks like your cracker-ass friends decided to bust out the Halloween costumes, eh, Slim?
Listen to what the police dispatcher has to say after a crime is reported in the mostly black district of Delray Hollow.
I've been a call about a hit and run in the Hollow. If any of y'all got the patience for it, feel free to swing by.
Now listen to this clip of a crime being committed in the wealthier, predominantly white neighborhood of Frisco Fields.
Available unit. Suspicious individual on foot. Officers investigating.
Showing which districts they actually care about serving and protecting. The other gameplay method that portrays racism as a game mechanic in Mafia III is segregation.
This shop's whites only, boy.
For anyone less familiar with US history, segregation is the legal process in the United States used throughout the 19th and 20th century to keep black and white people separated, and to ensure that African Americans were systematically kept as second-class citizens. This is portrayed in the game by certain shops, gas stations, restaurants, etc. being marked with signs banning people of color from entering. If the player enters one of these establishments, the store clerk usually starts hurling racist insults at you the second they see you, and the warning word, trespassing, flashes on the screen. This usually only happens when you enter enemy territory and the game is letting you know you should expect gunfire if you are spotted. If you stick around a segregated establishment for too long, the clerk calls the police on you for loitering. Fun fact, Mafia III actually takes place after President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into effect, officially ending federal government-sanctioned segregation in the United States. But the practice continued for many years after this, using different names and in spite of the law. Unfortunately, many segregation-evoking practices such as inner-city schools and redlining continue even today. With all these realistic limitations, you might be wondering, is this game still even fun if its world is blatantly out to get me? Wasn't there enough challenge in the previous games without literally fighting racism itself? For the most part, sure, but what's interesting is how Mafia III handles these mechanics while keeping the inherent power fantasy of video games intact. How Hangar 13 does so can be summed up in one phrase: military training. Lincoln Clay is a combat veteran with specific training in covert operations and psychological warfare.
Someone like that you don't need to train. You point them in the right direction and get the fuck out of their way.
And once you get the sensitivity of your controller set correctly, he lives up to the hype. Aside from using effective guerrilla warfare and terror tactics against his enemies, including using their own symbols of fear against them, Lincoln can literally cut his way through Dixie Mafia members, guarding the resources he requires, without anyone being alerted to his presence until it's far too late.
You keep your head down or you lose it. That right there is a real moral of the story.
Take him!
Or if stealth isn't your thing, Lincoln can become the embodiment of the DM's worst nightmares by walking through the front gates of various strongholds with 2 guns and a combat jacket full of explosives, ammo, and adrenaline shots, proceeding to slaughter mobsters left and right with US government-trained violence. In combat, you can retaliate for all the racist insults being hurled at you with overwhelming force, stealth tactics, and regenerating health. You can also further tilt the odds in your favor with perks given to you by your underbosses with access to more weapons, health upgrades, or even vehicle upgrades and police department informants that can help you escape from your local law enforcement buddies. Even segregated businesses become a fun outlet for any pent-up frustrations when you can stroll in, knock out the racist owner, steal his money, and leave his unconscious body in the middle of the bayou. Knowing where to draw the line between serious story elements and satisfying shooty-stabbing mechanics can be a real challenge in games, and though Mafia 3's combat and stealth might not be as in-depth as games solely dedicated to those aspects, they complement the story and its themes well, while keeping the game fun. Mafia 3 has so much to talk about, from its visual storytelling to its use of symbolism and references. But what do you think? Let us know if you want to see more on the subject or if we messed up any historical facts. Or tell us if we've persuaded you to take another look at a game whose ambitious story, setting, and visuals pushed the technology of the time to its limits.
You know, Sal wanted me to go to law school. Work for some big company. Maybe run for office. Do something decent with your goddamn life, you understand?
Should've listened to him.
It's in the blood, you know.
Yeah. You are who you are. No point in arguing with yourself about it.
Fuck you.